If you have to defend your behaviour as technically not illegal, that's a great signal that what you're doing should probably be illegal. I'm looking at you, Tasmanians. That's right, Tasmania, where you're still allowed to log pristine wilderness. Oh, you thought I was going to go with a cousin rooting joke. Idiots! Are you really that stupid to think I'm that much of a hack? I guess your pattern recognition skills aren't going to be that great after a century of inbreeding. I'll give you 3 seconds to catch up. You hear? No, stop thinking about your cousins. Anyway, another thing inbred dullards like to claim that technically isn't illegal is pork barrelling. Pork barrelling is the practice of wastefully diverting taxpayer dollars to projects that aren't needed in order to win votes, or more serious cases, almost vindictively withholding taxpayer dollars from certain areas in order to punish them for voting the wrong way. Surprisingly, the main perpetrators of that act proclaim it's perfectly legal. Just like how the creepiest neckbeards, are always spouting this little fun fact. Did you know that Japan's age of consent is actually 13? Sorry, I got that wrong. Nepal's age of consent is 13. Multiple senior coalition politicians and their lawyers, I might add, have breathlessly made this claim when defending what effectively are their multi-billion-dollar tax re-election slush funds. Sorry to clarify, a claim about pork barrelling, that is, not about the age of consent. Well, maybe George Christensen has said that consent thing in the past. We don't know, who knows. They say that pork barrelling is legal, from Gladys Berejiklian saying, it's not an illegal practice. Scott Morrison responded to questions about pork barrelling with, no one is suggesting anyone has broken any law, are they? And I'm going to be very careful here, I'm just stating a fact, but John Barilaro has also stated, I'm not supposed to do the accent anymore. Let me accurately portray his voice. You want to call that pork barrelling? You want to call that buying votes? It's what the elections are for. He's also labelled himself Pork Barilaro. His own lawyers have successfully argued in court. Look, I'm on thin ice talking about this, but I'm just going to read a Guardian article verbatim. On the pork barrelling claim, Chrysanthou argued that while people might think the practice is the wrong thing to do, it was incapable of showing he was a corrupt con man. There's no subterfuge, no dishonesty, no fraud. According to that particular, this is something my client openly and proudly does, she said. It doesn't fall within the notion of a corrupt con man. On a separate note, recently the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption held a forum on pork barrelling to, quote, examine the practice of pork barrelling, including whether it is lawful and ethical and whether it could constitute corrupt conduct under the Independent Commission Against Corruption Act of 1988. It gathered some of the greatest legal minds to give their views on the practice, including Professor Anne Toomey, who opened her speech with,
like many people, I have been infuriated by ministers at both the state and the federal level asserting that they have an unfettered ministerial power and that there's nothing illegal or corrupt about pork barrelling. In my view, both propositions are wrong.
Oh, hang on a second. All these really powerful people told me that pork barrelling can't possibly be corruption. Why would ICAC even be interested in examining the topic if that's the case? Look, I don't even really need to dance around this. The forum was pretty scathing. It's not like ICAC would just be like, oh, let's just have a forum into Yu-Gi-Oh cards to investigate if playing them could constitute corrupt conduct. But we all still really like them, which, by the way, join my Patreon, because every month we make a video that patrons vote for. So join up if you want to see, what if Warhammer 40k and Yu-Gi-Oh were in the same universe? Ooh, shilling Patreon in a video about corruption. How low can you go? Now, let's be honest, that sentence basically just describes my business model. Anyway, the ICAC forum really took issue with the state government's Stronger Communities Fund, with ICAC Commissioner Peter Hall QC saying that it was on the other side of the line because it so obviously existed to solely achieve political objectives. Why was that so obvious? Well, Gladys Berejiklian was advised in a briefing note that her staff were working to get the cash out the door in the most politically advantageous way. That's pretty much a smoking gun. But because pork barrelling is not directly a statutory criminal offence, and surprisingly the government themselves have recommended against making it such, you can't necessarily march in and start charging politicians with pork barrelling. But the case being made by legal experts is that there is common law precedent for pork barrelling to constitute a range of criminal offences, with Professor Anne Toomey stating, in short, pork barrelling may satisfy conditions of corrupt conduct under the ICAC Act, where there is partial behaviour that occurs for an improper purpose, and in very serious cases, it might even constitute a criminal offence of misconduct in public office. In fact, in a recent interview, former New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions, Nicholas Cowdery QC, pointed to the case of Scott v Martin as, quote, legal precedent for pork barrelling to count as corruption, saying how he was shocked that no one else had brought it up. Scott v Martin is a 1988 case wherein state Labor candidate Bob Martin won the seat of Port Stephens by 90 votes, and his Liberal opponent challenged the victory in the Court of Disputed Returns by essentially claiming he pork barrelled by presenting thousands of dollars worth of cheques to community organisations and making other promises including $15,000 to a koala preservation society. How much nicer were pork barrelling politicians back then? Now they call them tree rats. Anyway, the Liberals argued this was akin to electoral bribery. The court found in favour of the Liberals, and the election was void and a by-election was called. And although in the judgment, the judge conceded that Martin's behaviour wasn't corrupt in the ordinarily accepted meaning of the word, it was clear the funds were being used in order to influence an election. Funnily enough, the next paragraph of the paper on electoral bribery, where I got a lot of the info for Scott v Martin from, is about the Metherell affair, where an MP that was problematic for the government was gifted a cushy taxpayer-funded job in order to get him out of Parliament, and ICAC found that was corrupt. But how's that? Recently, a court ruled that pork barrelling was akin to electoral bribery enough to void an election. Coincidentally, Professor AJ Brown, who was also at the ICAC forum, labelled what has been happening in Australia recently as being a hair's breadth away from direct electoral bribery. But anyway, remember how the judge in Scott v Martin conceded that Martin's behaviour wasn't corrupt in the ordinarily accepted meaning of the word? Here's where we get to definitions. The ordinarily accepted meaning of the word corrupt has changed. The Commissioner of Victoria's ICAC, IBAC, explains it best, basically making the case that corruption isn't limited to being a statutory crime. Just because police aren't at your doorstep for it, it doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't corrupt. Corruption is not just crime or misconduct, it's a breach of standard. Corruption is the term used to encapsulate deliberate non-compliance with processes set down with an organisation, including nepotism, conflicts of interest, and inappropriate conduct in the workplace. So it's pretty clear you can label pork barrelling corrupt. But if you need any more convincing, right before the federal election, Nine Fairfax's Knock-Off Wall Street Bets subreddit, the Australian Financial Review, they published an editorial that essentially said, yeah, pork barrelling is bad, but we don't think it should be investigated by ICAC or the proposed federal ICAC. No reason, we just don't think it should. Anyway, travel section, why Japan's looking good this time of year? Former Supreme Court Judge, Assistant ICAC Commissioner, Centre for Public Integrity Chair Anthony Wheely QC wrote an article in response that in no uncertain terms said that pork barrelling could be considered corrupt. I mean, it was titled, Pork Barrel Politics Isn't Just About Integrity, It Is Corrupt. Does leave some grey areas. This, again, is a view held by Geoffrey Watson SC, who's even argued that the term pork barrelling trivialises the seriousness of the conduct. It's not pork barrelling when you're using tens of millions of public money for political ends. It's actually a misuse of public money, and in some circumstances, it can be corrupt conduct. It's true! Imagine if politicians started calling themselves the Fraud King? Vote for me so I can get Ash K for my Robin Hood. Or imagine if we just called stock pumping and insider trading mutton frolicking. Or murder for that matter, beef galloping. There isn't much nuance left in the pork barrelling argument, is there? There's broad consensus that it's wrong. There's legal precedent for pork barrelling being shunned. You have a list of Australia's top legal minds pushing for something to be done about the practice and even arguing there is enough common law to take action. Geoffrey Watson SC, Nicholas Cowdery AOQC, Peter Hall QC, Anthony Wheely QC, Professor Anne Toomey, Professor AJ Brown versus some guy that just lost the job he really wanted and it was a miracle he got given in the first place, Scott Morrison. So basically I'm asking, when are we going to get some investigations, some prosecutions? Everyone hates it. All experts think it's crooked. Who's going to be the maverick who puts a politician in prison for pork barrelling? When those hippies were blocking the street for protest, think about how quick the politicians changed the laws to make it easy to chuck them in jail. And look, a hippie blocking your road might be annoying, but you know what's worse than that? That road being riddled with potholes because you wanted to vote for the goddamn Drew Pavlou Democratic Alliance over the Liberals. Even then, Labor, we have precedent for pork barrelling to overturn electoral results, launch some challenges next election, make the New South Wales government behave themselves. Like and subscribe.
Please share and comment below. Comment.